All right. Well, I've got 11 o'clock, maybe even 11:01. So I know we've got a lot of material to cover. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So as folks log in, they'll get caught up here. So you ready, Alp? Shall we go ahead and get going?
I am ready.
Awesome. Let's do it. All right. Well, good morning still, I guess, to everyone. It's already warm enough to feel like afternoon, but thank you for joining us today and welcome to another session in this year's annual monthly workshop series. For any of you who don't know, my name is Jason Dahl. I am a certified financial planner and a partner at AFS Financial Group. And with me today is my colleague, Alp Adabek. Alp is the founder and managing partner of AFS. Quick aside, I know we have several people tuning in from the AFS 401k side of the company. So as a quick reminder, we at AFS Financial Group operate as a separate entity from the AFS 401k Retirement Services team, but we do often collaborate, especially when it comes to our financial wellness programs and workshops and webinars and so forth. So welcome. And today, of course, we will be presenting one of our newest presentations as part of our monthly workshop series, Making Work Optional, Living Your Retirement Dream. So very excited about today's session. As I said earlier, we got a lot of great material to cover. And so today's session involves things like how to leverage various investment strategies and resources to help you reach your retirement goals and retirement income wants and needs. We'll also touch on how to optimize your employer-sponsored retirement plan or plans and the benefits that come with it. Part of this session will also be spent in eMoney. This eMoney is a robust financial planning platform that we utilize with our clients. And we will walk through a case study and view the impacts of several different retirement planning strategies kind of in real time, you know, as I share my screen and go through the program. Also, please ask questions at any time during today's session. We do not mind being interrupted. We are, though, going to keep everyone on mute. We just find that works the best. But so you can ask a question by typing it into the Q&A link on your screen. So if you're not familiar, just take a quick look. There should be a little bar. And I see somebody already sent a chat in. Well, we're excited about this one too, so thanks for that. So yeah, use the Q&A dialog box or the chat box. We'll keep our eye out for those. So feel free to ask questions at any time, and we will either address them, you know, as soon as we see them, or we may, you know, reserve the right to hold off and address it if we know we're going to cover it later on. And I also want to share that probably our favorite question is, can I schedule a time to speak with you, Jason and Alp? And I want to encourage you to please directly follow up with us after the webinar. If you have further questions about today's presentation or any other topic and would like to schedule a time to review a few things over Zoom, over the phone, or even in person now. So you know, we are back in-person meetings in our office in Bethesda. So we truly do love what we do, and the best part of what we do is connecting with people like yourselves and helping you solve personal financial planning puzzles. So please don't hesitate to reach out. And with that said, note this is being recorded. We will get this recording out to everybody. It usually takes a day or two to just kind of get everything processed and packaged, and Natalie on our team will get that out to everybody most likely early next week. So please know that you will get the recording will be available, and copies of the slides if you like as well. Very good. All right, so many of you have seen this slide before, but it's a good one here, and I think it provides a great framework. And it comes from the most common, I'll say, kind of financial query or queries that we hear that really fall under the umbrella of one major question, and I'll sort of summarize it as, hey, what should I be doing with my money, right? Like kind of what's the next best thing I should do with each new dollar I have available to me, right? And so kind of that comprehensive sort of all-encompassing question inspired us on both AFS Financial Group and 401k team we work together to create the hierarchy of financial needs. So this hierarchy serves as the framework for our financial wellness program, and we use the hierarchy to help individuals properly and simply prioritize their financial lives. So before kind of diving in and exploring the hierarchy, it's always really important to first know what your current kind of financial situation is. And what I mean by that is it's good to take some time to kind of put your personal CFO hat on and first and foremost kind of review your monthly spending. right? And this is really valuable, especially as you're preparing for, transitioning into, or even once you're in retirement, right? Is to periodically assess, hey, where is every dollar that I earn, where is it going, right? Every dollar that comes in, where does it go, right? Is it going to taxes? Is it being spent? Where is it being spent? Or is it being saved? And where is it being saved, right? So once you have a sense of your current financial picture in that regard, think of our hierarchy as your kind of linear roadmap to financial success and independence. The hierarchy begins at the bottom with the most basic kind of important steps and highest priority items, with each step building on the previous one until you reach the top. Now, all of us, everyone is currently somewhere on this hierarchy. And of course, ideally, you want to kind of fully meet the goals of one level before moving to the next rung. However, we recognize, right, life doesn't always allow you to move in such an orderly fashion. And many of us probably have one foot on one level and the other on another. It's also important that after you successfully kind of make it through the hierarchy, you're going to want to find yourself revisiting certain steps to make adjustments to account for any changes in your life, right? Change is the only constant in this world, and right, whether it be change in income, job changes, new expenses, or living costs, just to name a few. And we're going to dive into a lot of those different kind of changes that happen in life as it relates to retirement. So this is a great question, right? One of the biggest questions that I think a lot of folks perhaps think of, maybe not necessarily in these specific terms, but perhaps shy away from asking it. And I know Alp and I and our whole team, we kind of inherently are always sort of thinking about this, right? When we're helping folks prepare a retirement plan. And really kind of the blunt answer is yes, it can happen, right? And not only can some folks kind of run out of money or outlive their money, right? I think that's probably one of the most common kind of fears that folks have when they think about retirement. But it's also important to think about some of the unforeseen, I'll just kind of call mental struggles in retirement. So for example, we may all welcome the idea of freedom from busy schedules, right? No early alarms, no scheduled meetings, right? But often many of us, I'll say, miss that the daily interaction, the daily structure, right? That we were so used to for so many years of our life. So it's really important to plan for that piece of retirement as well. And we're going to kind of touch on that. Touch on a lot of the sort of the social changes that come with retirement. So these next 3 slides is just kind of a teaser, if you will, of a sampling of the many kinds of questions, right? And this first, when it comes to thinking about retirement, and this first slide is really kind of, at least for us, right, as kind of financial advisors, that you would think like, oh, okay, yeah, these are the ones you always think about, kind of the financial or money questions, right? They're usually those first ones that come to mind and weigh on our thoughts when we think about our future retirement years, right? I'm not going to read them all. You can just kind of glance on it and think, oh yeah, all these things are relevant, right? And probably impact all of you in one way or another, right? Then of course you have, I'll call it sort of the softer side, if you will, the questions that are just as important, but often kind of get overlooked or shortchanged a little bit. But we need to ask ourselves, right, as we were preparing for retirement, or even if you're already in retirement, right, kind of, what do you want from your retirement, right? It's your retirement. You want to enjoy it, right? So that your retirement doesn't need to look like everybody else's, right? I think that's one lesson that we've learned over the years is there are many different flavors of retirement. It's not that, what was it a Cadillac ad? I'll talk about this is not your grandfather's Cadillac.
Might have been Oldsmobile, but
okay. Right, and just for good measure, right, here are some more questions, right, that kind of start blending together. Some of the, what do I want to get out of retirement? Oh, but also what's the financial component of it, right? They're so intertwined.
I mean, it's really fascinating how many times we get asked these specific questions or variations of them.
Or that we pose them, right?
Yeah, I mean, I know on the first one with the various things, people talk about charitable contributions. Will I still be able to afford to make the same level of contributions? Can they gift to family members? It really is fascinating. But probably the most common one we get is, should I pay off my house in retirement if you still have a mortgage on it? And, I just wanted to bring up that point because that's one thing we get asked quite often, but we always tell people, only if you've got a lot of personal assets. And when I say personal, a lot of non-retirement assets. We at times come across a lot of people with a lot of money in their 401k balances and their IRA balances, and they want to pull money out to pay off their mortgage, but that's a taxable event and it will put them up in a much higher tax bracket. So it's usually not advisable. So just wanted to throw that out there.
Unless you've been one of those amazing Roth savers, right? And we'll talk about Roths later.
Yeah. So when you talk about imagining your retirement, for me, this slide is completely me. I always think about slowing down or retiring with me on an island with my wife and just sitting there. And there's a place we've gone a number of times, Turks and Caicos in the Caribbean, and they have these thatch umbrellas that when I sit under them and just look out the water, there's always a time that I look over at my wife and we're almost thinking the same thing. And we're like, this has got to be like the closest thing to heaven there is, where it's just so beautiful. So for me, when I think about retirement, I think about slowing down and, just what do I really want to do? And so where am I? So for me, it's possibly being in a much warmer climate. I don't think I'm going to go north. I can guarantee that. We've had one client in the past that went from southern Florida to Maine, which I'll tell you, that's not going to be me. I'm probably more the typical person who'll go somewhere warmer. What am I doing? Jason touched on this a little bit. This is really important. Not everyone can fill their time in retirement. I think it's a lot easier for those that have hobbies or a passion for volunteering. Like for me, I'll say it's a struggle because there's only so much golf and bike riding that I can do in a day. So I think I'm one of these people, and we'll get on to this later, but like I'll probably have to transition into retirement much slower. And who are you with? And that kind of relates to where are you? Probably the most common thing we hear is somebody says, well, I've got grandkids now and I want to be closer to them. They moved to wherever and they want to just relocate there. So when you think of these questions, really, really good questions to ask yourself. One thing that we also think is really fascinating, have you talked to your partner about your plans? And I'd say it always fascinates us. We're in a serious retirement planning meeting with a couple, and one person will say, I'd like to do this during retirement, or I'd like to live here. And we look at the face of the other spouse and they just basically say, yeah, that's the first I've heard of that. So make sure you communicate with each other and work out a plan. And it's not something that should just be sprung on somebody. Transitioning into retirement, I've said for years that baby boomers are redefining retirement. They are much more active. They're not ready to slow down. Natalie, who's on this with us, who puts together all these great presentations, she runs a lot of races. And I remember I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, she was running a race down in St. Michael's. And she actually won the race, which was, congratulations,
pretty
Natalie.
Cool.
But while she was running it, it was actually through we have a house down there. And so it was part of the race was through our neighborhood. And I remember seeing this gentleman that was up fairly close to the lead. I think it was a half marathon, up fairly close to the lead. I was like, that's an older person. So after the race, I looked him up and he was a 67-year-old and just running at an incredible pace. And my point is just so much more fit, so much more active. So for some people, it's difficult to kind of slow down at that traditional age, but things you can do to make it easier. And I think the baby boomers are doing this. You can go part-time and 80%, 50%, 30%. Not everybody has a work environment they can do it, but at times when we've talked to people about it, and one thing we've always said is if you can go from a 2-day weekend to a 3-day weekend, so working 80%, that basically gives you 50% more weekend. And when we talk to people about it, sometimes they come back and say, you know what? I talked to the company and they said, fine. If you want to keep working, we're happy to cut your comp to 80%. And yeah, we love the productivity we get. So
and I think some of those opportunities have probably opened up more so for folks, given kind of the result of kind of the job market from the pandemic, right? And the opportunities for remote work, and right. So I think we've definitely heard from some folks that say, yeah, before their expectation was I needed to be there in person 5 days a week, and that was kind of it. Well, you know what? Now that's changed for a lot of roles, and you might be able to say, you know what, I can do this 3 days a week, and maybe I don't even need to do it where in the same town I've been in.
But I'll put on my career counsel hat. The one thing I will say is if you're going to work 80%, that means you got to turn off the phone on that day. You really have to pretend it's a weekend day and get that extra day off. Other things, basically take a leave of absence, sabbatical leave from your job, and find out if you can do it. And what we're looking for there is, can you really handle taking 2 or 3 months off away from work? Can you handle what is developed? We really don't have a schedule. One thing we hear from a lot of people also is they want to do something entirely different. And what they mean by that is they don't love what they do every day that much anymore. So, they're happy to find another job. They want to keep working, just less stress, lower pay is fine. And worst case scenario out of all this, you can always go back to work.
Yep. Well, for most folks, right? That's
yes, fair
that's
statement.
available.
Sure.
Yep.
Today's job market, a lot easier.
Yeah. Right. So as this kind of transitions into sort of what will you be funding in retirement right now, right? Because a lot of things start to shift from your life while working and earning and saving money, right? And we've been touching on a little bit of both the financial side of things and kind of the softer side of things. But right, so now we got to start bringing it together and thinking about, okay, what's it going to cost, right? Right, like what's the lifestyle that I want to live? What's that going to cost, and how am I going to fund it, sort of regardless of how long I live, right? And so, as I mentioned earlier, running out of money during retirement is probably the biggest fear. I know that a lot of the companies survey retirees, and that's always right near the top, right? And so we always talk about the concept of retirement income planning, right? And there's a lot of layers to that, and we're gonna touch on a lot of that as we go further into this. But really, kind of the retirement goal, so sort of from our perspective, really is sort of here a little technical definition for us is right to provide enough income to be able to maintain your standard of living for the rest of your life, regardless of how long you live, right? And so that there's a underlying several components to that, right? Longevity, inflation, right? Maintaining that standard of living, and really having an understanding. The first thing I talked about of okay, what's your current lifestyle cost? How does that look as you transition into retirement? And understanding like where all the money is going and what sources of income you're going to have. And then right there may be new expenses to consider in retirement, new or different expenses, and some of the big ones, right, that can sort of wreak havoc in some instances to a retirement income plan, right? Have you thought about long-term care? What if you or your loved one need care for an extended period of time? Okay, do you have the resources, the income sources that you could divert to that? Should you consider long-term care insurance, right? So we always emphasize making sure you have a plan, and that plan may be some combination of those things, but it's really important to sort of think through a plan. Might you need to support a family member or a parent, right? And both, right? So that can have a financial impact, but it can also have an emotional and physical impact, right? If you've got to kind of divert part of sort of your attention and time and money to supporting a family member. Do you want to have a second home, or possibly just sort of relocate and rent for an extended period of time? We hear that a lot. Uncovered healthcare expenses, right? I think one of the big ones is if someone is sort of retiring, losing employer-sponsored benefits before reaching age 65 for Medicare, right? So that can be a really expensive gap in time. The good thing is it's a finite period, right? You know when you're going to turn 65 and be eligible for Medicare, but it can be very expensive, right? And then another one that is important to consider is, what if you were to lose the income from a spouse? And I don't want to be, crass there and say, obviously there's so much more to losing a spouse, right, than just the income. But of course, a piece of it is thinking about, hey, well, what if their Social Security or a pension or, other sources of income were lost if someone were to pass away prematurely? All right, so this slide is one that we've used for a long time to just sort of lay the framework, and it's a really quick kind of back of the envelope way of estimating your income needs in retirement, right? And so it starts with sort of your gross pre-retirement income, right? So the total household income now while you're working, right? Subtract from that what you're paying in payroll taxes, right? 6.2 to Medicare tax and the 145 for excuse me, I flipped that around. 6.2 for Social Security tax, the 145 for Medicare, right? Because you're not going to pay payroll taxes on retirement income, right? IRA distributions, Social Security, and so forth. Then what are you currently saving for retirement, right? Because once you're in retirement, presumably you're no longer saving for retirement, right? So if you take that gross pre-retirement income, subtract what you're paying in payroll taxes, subtract what you're saving, that's kind of what's left is what you're spending, right? And by spending, that includes, I'll say, regular income taxes, right? But sort of everything else. And so this provides a really good, quick, like I said, back of the envelope way of estimating. We just put 3 examples down there to just sort of show that it's not uncommon that oftentimes it comes out around an 80% kind of replacement percentage, and fully recognize that, hey, some folks, maybe ultra high net worth or ultra high income levels, and this is all kind of proportional, right? But that's what's sort of the beauty about this sort of simple formula is you can kind of do a quick estimate. And the reason why we emphasize this and kind of start early on in this is probably the most important variable for driving a successful retirement plan, is understanding the spending side of the equation. Alp has heard me say this many times.
I'd probably
right?
say
Yep.
Well, I think it's probably the most unknown question or answer, that when we ask clients how much they're spending, it's amazing how many people are like, oh, I actually don't really know. And they usually way underestimate how much they're currently spending.
Yeah, it's pretty common where we'll hear somebody say, oh, I think I'm spending, X dollars a month. And Alp and I do this so often, we can kind of do some quick mental math. Okay, we know how much you're making, we know how much you're saving. You're probably spending, we can estimate probably how much you're paying in taxes. And like you said, a lot of times folks underestimate how much they're spending. It's really important to get that piece of the equation sorted out. And then, of course, there's the other side of the equation, right? So you got the expense side, and then how are you going to pay for it? Right? In some levels, it's kind of simple, right? And there's the analogy of the old 3-legged stool of retirement's paid for from Social Security, from I'll call it kind of traditional pension, right? Think like the FERS or civil service for government employees, and then your own personal savings, right? Through what you've contributed to a 401k, an IRA, a 403b, your own personal savings account, right? And really, then it just becomes, okay, how do I now turn all those things into the most tax efficient and investment income generating investment portfolio that I need, right? To cover the expense side of the equation, right? And sort of to that point, all right, so there's, just sort of a slightly different visual of it is thinking about kind of the different buckets of income. And I touched on, right, so your own personal savings, pensions. Now, I mentioned sort of the 3-legged stool. For a lot of folks, it's now a 2-legged stool because traditional pensions are getting fewer and farther between. I realize in this area, there's still a fair number of, like I said, federal employees who will have a pension and so forth. But for a lot of folks, it may just be a 2-legged stool. But that's where kind of what Alp was talking about. A lot of folks may have other income, whether it be, maybe they have rental properties that are cash flow positive, or they're going to, work part-time, like Alp said, maybe do something entirely different, or just cut back what they're doing and do fewer hours, right? But so they still may have other sources of income in retirement, or it may mean perhaps liquidating a second home at some point, right? They say, okay, hey, hey, we love the 2 homes, but as we age and we slow down, a lot of folks say we're just going to downsize to 1, and that, thinking about that coming into the plan as a source of income. So, quick kind of comments on a pension, right? So whether you're getting a federal pension or maybe a private sector pension, they're realizing there are still some out there, not as many. I believe the latest stats I've said, for every new kind of retiree, it's now under a third across the country that have some form of a pension, and that percentage is actually getting lower. But really important to think about, and when you're factoring in, right, when you're doing your retirement projections and that retirement income planning, will that pension have a cost of living adjustment, right? Really important one is, do you have a plan, and what happens to that benefit if you were to pass away before you retire? Right? Especially in the private pension area, we've seen all sorts of different, results that may come from that. And you may say, I need to consider maybe some life insurance to protect against that, loss of pension income if I were to pass away before I've retired and turned it on. Really important to think about your and your partner's life expectancies, right? If you're choosing a survivor benefit on a pension, and if there's an age differential between the two of you, and really important to consider, hey, I might want, if I'm the male and older, right, than a female, statistically speaking, I'm going to pass away before her, right? You may say I need to elect perhaps the full survivor benefit. Any other benefits tied to survivor pension election. So federal government, great example, the federal retiree health benefits tied to that. And there are definitely other pensions that the health benefit piece of it is tied to making sure that there continues to be a survivor benefit, a pension being received. And then another big one is there a lump sum option? More and more, especially the private sector pensions, are offering to pay out a lump sum because they kind of want to get it off their books, get that liability off their books in most instances. And so, that's a whole nother calculation, and you got to kind of answer all these questions and then some. And that's something, that we certainly help folks kind of run a calculus and look at, hey, what might be better, weighing the different pros and cons. Of course, Social Security. Quick aside, we have 2 separate Social Security presentations where we go into great detail on claiming Social Security benefits. We've got 2 slides today, so we're just really going to kind of touch just scratch the surface here. But the really important takeaway is don't take it lightly. Social Security benefits are valuable, and we are firm believers that they're going to be around. I know there's a lot of press out there, and if anybody wants to get into, geek out with me and talk Social Security, I'm happy to do that offline about the Social Security Trust Fund and how long it's going to last. But long and short of it, we firmly believe it's going to be around. I expect to receive Social Security someday. But will the rules change? Yes, I expect the rules to change, right? Whether they push back the full retirement age, which is, under current rules, it's age 67 for most folks going forward. I expect they're going to push that back to 68, 69, right? Then there are other various changes that they may make. But
a slight increase to the amount that you contribute to pay for Social Security.
Yep.
6.2 to 6.3%, those type of things.
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah. It's a solvable problem. All right. And so this chart is just to kind of give you a sense for, just for waiting, they're going to increase your benefit just for waiting. That doesn't include any cost of living adjustments that may come, or if you're still working and adding to the benefits, right? So there is kind of a return on investment calculation to think about, and thinking about your life expectancy. You can file as early as 62, you can delay as late as age 70, and it's basically a 7 to 8% increase just for waiting.
And one of the major benefits there is if one spouse has had a higher income than the other. And so let's just say one spouse Social Security benefit will be $3,500 a month and the other one's $2,000 a month. If you delay the $3,500 a month one till age 70, the survivor will get the larger of their benefit or their spouse's benefit. So there's an advantage for delaying it in that example.
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah. In a married couple situation, the survivor gets the higher of the two, just emphasizing that. So keeping that in mind.
So this is probably one of the more common questions we get, how much money can I pull out of my account and not fear that I'm going to run out of money at some point? And a concept called the safe withdrawal rate was developed. And basically it says that if you're expecting a 30-year retirement, so let's just say somebody's retiring at 65 and expecting to live to 92, 95, they're saying you can pull out 4% of the account and then give yourself a cost of living increase each year. For example, if somebody had $2 million of savings, they can pull out 4% in the first year, that's $80,000. And then in year 2, give themselves a cost of living adjustment and they'll pull out, in this example, 3% more, 82.4. So if you delay retirement, if you decide, I'm going to retire at 70, 71, 72, whatever it may be, you obviously can increase that amount. If you try to do it earlier, so if you wanted to retire at age 60, you have to be a little bit more cautious on this. Of course, life expectancy is a big consideration, but the whole system is basically designed to last 30 years through bear markets, through corrections, through big booms in the markets. It's doing 4% will work. If you actually go to 5 or 6% and you try to do it earlier, there have been periods in history that it would not have worked out.
Just two quick comments. I know we had a question come in about this because I know there's constantly articles coming out about is the 4% safe withdrawal rate still the right number, right? We've always emphasized whether it's 4%, whether it's 3.5%, whether it's 4.5%, right? It's a rule of thumb. It's not right to be the gospel for all people, but it does. We still believe that it provides a very helpful sort of baseline benchmark to start from. But then you obviously got to dive into your own personal plan to make sure that that this is the right number for you.
So if you're trying to do a back of the envelope calculation of like, what does it all mean? How much income will I have in retirement? This is a pretty simple example. If you're going to get Social Security, take 4% of the account, you're doing the safe withdrawal rate, and then other. We currently have 0 under other, so you can fill in whatever it may be for you. It could be pensions, it could be rental income, you could have trust income coming in. There's a lot of different ways that people have other in there. But in this example, we're saying this person would have received $36,000 from Social Security and 4% on the $2 million portfolio, they'd get $80,000. So their pre-tax income in the first year of retirement would be $116,000. So you could fill this out any which way you want with the numbers you think make sense for you. Things to remember, you still pay tax in retirement. You can alter that a little bit if you move to a state with a lower income tax or a state with no income tax. And you also have to remember things like Social Security benefits, they are taxable in retirement. Up to 85% of Social Security benefits may be subject to federal income taxes. For everybody we deal with, it's going to be 85% will be added to your taxable income. It's not taxable in Maryland, DC, or Virginia. So if you decide to move to a different state in retirement, one of the things people do is evaluate how tax friendly the state is.
We had a quick question and just address that. The 4% for that initial year, that applies no matter what the portfolio value is. We just put in a $2 million portfolio value. And again, keep in mind, let's just say you're 10 years away from your expected retirement. You have to sort of project, right, what you think that portfolio value will be based on your savings rate, a reasonable rate of growth for the portfolio. But yeah, the percentage applies sort of no matter what that sort of total portfolio value is.
So what are the chances a 65-year-old will live to age 95? What we're focusing on here is obviously just longevity. And again, we're in meetings with clients all the time, and some clients will say, hey, the men in my family have only lived into their late 70s, early 80s, so they're not as worried about having a 30-year payout. But then there's times we're in meetings and somebody will say, oh, my mom's 98, 99 years old, and she's still driving. And that really is great, except when you have to pay for your retirement. So it's something you have to factor in that example. You might have, if you're going to try to retire, I'll say at age 65, 67, you might have to throw in like a 35-year, possibly even a 40-year life expectancy.
That's less than a 4% initial safe withdrawal rate, right? That's kind of the logic. Yep.
So inflation, for years when we do our retirement planning projections, we've been throwing in relatively high inflation rates, and a lot of people have asked us to rerun it to say, we haven't had that high of inflation for a long time. So can we actually lower it to maybe 2.5% inflation? We always thought that the constant money printing, this is even before we saw the crazy money printing after the pandemic, we always thought at some point we'd get some higher inflation. Now, nobody's discounting the threat of inflation. We're all living through it right now. Just remember, it's real. It's a real threat. And currently we're in an out of control situation, but I think they'll rein it in. But the real point here is you have to remember inflation exists in your retirement years.
And especially things like healthcare, right? Healthcare expenses have definitely been higher than the average sort of across the board CPI kind of inflation. But Medicare, I touched on this a moment ago. Again, whole separate presentation conversation. Just going to make a note. Remember, Medicare is not free, so you need to include that in your budget, right? You will pay a monthly premium for the different components that go into having Medicare. You're not eligible till age 65. Okay, right. And I talked about that. If you're retiring before 65, you need to, kind of budget for filling that gap. And a very common question we get is, oh, well, won't Medicare pay for long-term care expenses if I need someone to come into my home, or if I'm in a nursing home or assisted living? It's a real simple answer. No, it does not cover long-term care expenses. Medicare is health insurance, and that is totally separate from custodial or maintenance care through that is long-term care. So that's a separate form of insurance. Just a really important point to make. All right, so a couple more slides here, and then we'll get into the simulation. So it's really important to have an effective investment strategy that carefully allocates across different asset classes, with that classic goal, right, of maximizing return for a given level of risk, right? I mean, but that given level of risk is what oftentimes changes as we get closer to retirement, right? As the time frame for us is shrinking, and the number of years that we're going to be adding to the portfolio are getting shorter and shorter, and then we're transitioning to no longer adding to the portfolio but drawing it down, right? So that's the big transition, and it's diversification is still relevant, right? But it's just sort of the type of diversification. And one of the things that we often talk about, and I talked about this before, is sort of the makeup of the portfolio can change from, well, you might still have a similar level of equity allocation, but you might have different types of equity in your portfolio, right? I'm just using a simple example. You may have less growth and more kind of income producing, dividend paying kinds of stocks, right? But you still need to have some growth in most portfolios, because we need to outpace inflation, right? Some portion of the portfolio should be designed to outpace inflation. Some portion of the portfolio should be designed really for kind of current or near-term income generation, right? Whether it be through dividend-paying stocks, fixed income, bonds, and so forth. And for most people, you can't afford to get too conservative, right? Have all your money in cash, right? Because you would be essentially guaranteed to lose money every year, because you lose out to inflation, right? So diversification, building out a portfolio, all of the concepts still apply, right? But it actually becomes quite a bit more complicated and tricky once you're in retirement, no longer adding to it, right? And needing to generate the income to draw from it. Right. So just the shift of the makeup of the portfolio, right? As I talked about, you're going to.
Jason, you laid it out perfectly, but some thoughts basically are high dividend payers, real estate investment trust. Now that bond yields have gone up substantially, they actually look attractive compared to, I'll say, a year ago. So it's a lot easier to diversify for income. And one of the things that Jason did mention, for some people, it's actually a little bit different, where they know that they are cutting it close for retirement. So they really need to diversify. They're going to be taking away some of the potential growth to protect more on the downside, but the reverse is also true. We joke, one of our favorite stories is a gentleman that retired recently and worked into his 70s, but he's always been 100% in the market in his account, and he doesn't spend all of his required minimum distribution out of his retirement account each year. So even now, as he's getting closer to 80 years old, he still has his portfolio very, very aggressive, but it's because he has more than he needs for retirement. He's just not a big spender. So,
and I'll make a quick comment for everybody. Sorry. Yeah. Quick comment on annuities. I know we had a question come in there, and it, again, very, warrants a much deeper conversation. But where we find annuities can be helpful in this context of today's conversation is for some folks essentially complementing their other sources of kind of guaranteed income, right? So if you have Social Security and a pension and an annuity, right? Those sort of three fall into a similar category when thinking about retirement income planning, to say, you know what, maybe I want to diversify some of my, personal savings, personal portfolio, and take a portion of it, you're never going to take all of it and put it into an annuity, right? Because for a lot of different reasons. But you might say, hey, you know what, my Social Security covers, I'm just going to pick a number. Let's say my Social Security covers half of my basic expenses that I know I'm going to have in retirement, or 2/3, whatever it may be. And I want to have the comfort of knowing that all of my basic expenses are covered through a sort of a guaranteed source of income. That's where we think annuities can make a lot of sense, right? But they can get really complicated, a lot of different flavors. So definitely worth having a conversation with someone who's kind of objective and is acting in a fiduciary perspective in your best interest, because annuities are often the most, I'll say, sort of missold or oversold kind of financial product out there. So this slide, many of you are probably very familiar with the concept that is reflected here of target date funds. So anybody who has a thrift savings plan, a 401k, a 403b, probably almost guarantee you that you've got an option of a life cycle fund or a target date fund that basically says, hey, I expect to retire in the year 2030, 2040, 2050, right? They usually go in 5-year increments, and they follow a glide path, right? And this is just a quick visual representation of one sample glide path of a target date fund that says, oh, as I get closer to retirement, my equity bond kind of mix is going to shift, getting a little bit more conservative, but you don't want to get too conservative, right? You're still, as I talked about, you're still going to maintain some level of equities even once you're in retirement, because you're not spending all the money, right, the first handful of years.
One thing to keep in mind, they are not the same. So this is a JP Morgan slide. There are different glide paths for Fidelity, for Vanguard, for BlackRock. So they all have different ones. You have to understand what your plan has if they've got a target date fund in there, and make sure it aligns with your risk profile.
Yes, absolutely. So I know we're running a little behind schedule here, but we're going to get in here to the e-money. So this is a sample client that we made up and just plugged in sample information. But this program is something that we utilize all day, every day, I'll say. Any of our clients are familiar with this kind of view. But so this is just a quick overview of these sample clients, Robert and Joanna. Right, and it has summary of the kind of their total net worth. That includes all of their investable assets that are segregated down below, plus equity and real estate. Right. Then you have, here's kind of their high level breakdown of their current asset allocation. Then we've got the details of sort of their various investment accounts down below. Whoop. Just a reminder that I was running over time. Here we go, right back in it. Nice. So they have a variety of accounts, right? So a joint account, non-retirement account. Frank or Robert, Frank's his nickname, has a traditional IRA, a cash value whole life insurance policy, just sort of cash in the bank emergency fund. Frank's 401k, Frank has a group life insurance policy, you'll see, right? But it has no cash value component to it. Joanna's 401k, and Joanna has a Roth IRA. So here's the various account values for those accounts. So then we come in and just kind of give you a quick sense of sort of where Robert and Joanna or Frank and Joanna are. So right around age 60, each of them, they would like to retire at age 65. So right, they're getting close. They have a couple of adult grown children, still each have a parent living. I'm going to jump down here. So probably the most important thing is they determined that in today's dollars, they want to spend after taxes. So after paying taxes, they want to spend $10,000 a month. That's kind of their target goal, so $120,000 a year. Here is sort of the full net worth statement for Robert and Joanna. So it has all the various accounts that we talked about, then plus their homes. They have their primary home, they have a mountain home, they have some cars, and then they have one debt. They still have a mortgage on the primary home. That's where they get their net worth summary here. So important details thinking about income, right? So for the purposes of kind of projecting into retirement, we're assuming that they're going to retire kind of full stop at age 65. So both of these numbers, their current income levels, are just going to stop and go away at age 65. But this is what they're earning right now. Then we have future Social Security benefits estimated to kick in. And Joanna's going to get $1,000 a month pension projected once she retires. you'll see we plugged in here. They have full retirement ages for Social Security benefits of age 67. That's generally where we sort of start as a baseline to see, hey, how do things look if we assume you both started at 67? Then we start to apply some of the different claiming strategies like Alp talked about, like, oh, maybe it makes sense in this case, Joanna, who has the higher benefit, she might defer to 70 to lock in the highest possible benefit. So we noted the 120,000 a year sort of target. Sometimes we do this, sometimes not, depending on kind of the dynamic. But if we know that, hey, if someone were to predecease, the surviving spouse would probably spend less. All right, let's model that in. We can plug that in. We assume, again, kind of on our baseline planning, that our male clients live to 91, our female clients live to 93. Again, that's just kind of where we start. Alp talked about it. Hey, depending on your situation, that may need to be later than that. Maybe it's reasonable to be less than that.
No guarantees.
No guarantees from us, though. They have a mortgage, but it's we have a schedule for it to be paid off, and we'll see that expense piece, right? So it's in their case they're spending 120 plus the mortgage, right? So just to clarify that, plus they're spending insurance premiums. Right, they have long-term care, they have some life insurance policies. Some of those are going to fall off as they get into retirement, so they'll no longer have some of the life insurance premiums, but they will continue to have their long-term care insurance premiums. The program, of course, takes into consideration taxes, both federal and state. And we can model in that if someone is planning to move, in this example, from DC to Florida, for example, in retirement. I think Alp kind of hinted at that. He would like to do that, not just for the warm weather, but for the no state income tax, right? So we can plug it in to say, oh, if you're in retirement, do we need to continue to have you taxed at the DC rates, or can we model in what would it look like if you had no state income tax? All right. Obviously, they still have a handful of years that they expect to work and save, so they're contributing to their joint investment account, $1,000 a month, both max funding their retirement plans through work plus employer contributions, right? So then, of course, the asset allocation is really important to factor in both a future inflation rate to the expending, the 120,000, and then what's the portfolio expected return, right? And generally speaking, not generally, always, the key number to keep in mind is what's called the real rate of return, right? The difference between the expected rate of return of the portfolio less the expected rate of inflation, right? Because that's really the important number. And the number that we generally target is a 2.5% real rate of return. Again, that's where we start to say, hey, on average, we expect the portfolio to outpace inflation by 2.5%. Now, historically, that's actually fairly conservative or a tight number. Historically, portfolios have actually outperformed more than 2.5% over inflation. But again, we generally try to, when we're making all these assumptions and projections, what we aim for is we want to be reasonable, right, realistic, but err on the side of being conservative to start. All right. And then, of course, it's insurances, risk management. Okay. What if one of the spouses were to pass away prematurely? Would there be life insurance proceeds that would come in to help protect against lost income? What if one or both of them need extended care, long-term care benefits? They've got that available to them. They both have long-term care insurance in this case, right? So we can model in the various forms of insurance as well. All right. So moving quickly here, forgive me, but I want to make sure we cover all the good stuff. So I always like coming in here, looking at a quick cash flow view. Oh, and why'd you froze up on me? Why are you doing that to me? All right, I'm gonna skip the cash flow view for a moment, and let's kind of get to the drum roll piece of the results. So here's where it starts to say, okay, given all the set of assumptions that I just ran through quickly, right? Retirement age, life expectancy, portfolio, returns, and inflation, the spending targets, all of that kind of then gets baked in to, hey, can they afford this, right? If we make all those assumptions, how does it look, right? And then we can start modeling in what we call sort of what ifs, right? How can they improve it or stress test it and so forth? So this first chart shows us what we call a straight line assumption, where it's assuming you're going to get the same rate of return and the same level of inflation every single year through the rest of their lives, which is the one scenario we can guarantee is not going to happen. All right. You're never going to get the same rate of return, the same rate of inflation every single year. But it's important, I think, to sort of start there to see, okay, how does it look sort of under that sort of static viewpoint, right? Spending 120,000 a year, inflating that 120,000 a year, right? All the way through the rest of their life. This assumes them drawing money out of their portfolio, kicking on their Social Security, Joanna's pension, right? All those things. And under that straight line assumption, it's saying, oh, they're projected to have a future dollar cushion, if you will, of about $1.2 million. I emphasize the future value of it because I think it's always helpful. And this has a really neat, handy tool here. You can just click and say, well, what is that in today's dollars? So that cushion is more like around 550,000. Okay. So now let's do a little bit more of a reality check. And when we know you're not going to get that same rate of return and inflation rate every single year. So let's now apply what's called a Monte Carlo statistical sort of stress to it, where it's going to say, all right, given the various parameters and assumptions we've made, let's run what's called 1,000 different sequences of returns, right? Where we know we're not going to get 6.5% or 7% every year. There's going to be some higher, some lower, right? And we have no idea. You can't predict with any certainty what that sequence is going to look like. So let's apply 1,000 different ones and see how it turns out. So then we come here to here, and you'll see, kind of imagine the drum roll. All right, it's going to kick out a probability of success. And before I scroll down to show you what that probability is for the Millers, what success is defined as is them being able to spend at the levels that we outlined all the way through the rest of their life, right? The 120 plus their mortgage plus their insurance premiums, and inflate the 120 all the way through the end of their lives, and that there's at least $1 left over in their portfolio. That's how success is defined. They've got a 65% probability of success of hitting everything that we talked about. Okay, what does that mean? Give us a little context on that. What we like to see is something in the 80%. That's sort of the sweet spot where it's not, I'll say, just sort of too risky, right? You're not taking on too much risk of not being able to have a successful retirement, but it's also not too rigid or tight, right? So when you start getting over 90%, it's basically, I'm just saying you're not spending enough, right? And so if we want to get it up to 80, all right, well, okay, so let's think about what are some things the Millers could consider to get it up closer to 80%. What if Joanna deferred her Social Security to 70? Hey, we know if she's going to live to age 93, it's going to be in their advantage to defer it. This may not seem like a huge number. It's going to bump it up here a little bit, the probability of success.
Always in prime time when it
goes.
Oh gosh,
yeah. But I'm going to tell you, is it going to bump it up maybe 67, 68%? May not seem like that much, but it really does provide a really nice kind of longevity. Oh, just in this case, just 1%. It does provide a lot of peace of mind for like outliving your money, right? To know that, hey, I've locked in the highest possible source of income that has a COLA adjustment to it, cost of living adjustment, that I can't outlive. Right, so the deferring to 70, while this may not seem like a big deal, we actually find that it does provide a lot of sort of peace of mind. What if they were to just work 3 more years? I just want to illustrate sort of the impact that has, because not only are they saving for 3 more years, but it's 3 fewer years that they're drawing from their portfolio. Wow, big jump, right? That alone gets them to the target. All right. So, we can model in, like, what if it's, one of them only works 1 more year, right? What if one of them works 2 more years, right? Hopefully you all get the sense here, what that means. Well, what if they, instead of spending 120, hey, 120, maybe that was aspirational. Actually, more realistic, it's 108 plus the, mortgage and insurance premiums. Oh, 108 and inflating that gets them to the target.
And one thing to I want to just make sure we remind everybody, we're assuming you're going to spend the same amount of money each year throughout retirement. The reality is you'll actually slow down your spending later on. So we stress test this relatively hard. We know not everybody slows down their spending, and we also know there's a wild card of healthcare expenses later on in life that could kick in. So we like stress testing it the way we do. But I'll also
Absolutely.
emphasize that when you look at this type of program, it's amazing how powerful it is. The ability to make minor adjustments, whether, as Jason has, selling the mountain home, altering living
Yep.
expenses. It's fascinating how it's so customizable.
Yep. Yeah. And you can assume different ages that you sell the home for. What if you get, kind of, top dollar for it or less than what you expected, right? What if one of you ends up needing long-term care and the cost is higher than the insurance benefits? Okay, well, how do we layer that in? Right. And I'll just make one last point on eMoney before we sort of go back to the slides and wrap things up. This is not a once and done, set it and forget it, right? It's really a valuable sort of process to go through as you're getting ready for retirement, those first few years in retirement, as you're kind of figuring out kind of your spending groove. And are you, oh, you know what? Actually, 120 was light. It turns out that it's more than that. Okay, let's start, projecting that out. It's important to periodically revisit it. So, all right. So we got just a few more minutes here, and we will wrap up the last few slides.
Yeah, so this is just the limits you have on how much you can put into 401k plans, IRA. So IRA limits, if you're under age 50, is $6,000. Roth IRA is $6,000. If you're 50 or older, it's $7,000. 401ks, you can put in $20,500 right now. Or if you're 50 and over, $27,000. Same thing for Roth 401k. One thing we did not mention, SEP IRAs, for those that are self-employed, you can put in 20% of your net income. The max generally is $61,000. So a lot of ways you could add to retirement savings. When it comes to how much you have to take out, the rules have changed over the last few years. Now the required minimum distribution, which is the age you actually have to start taking money out of your retirement accounts, IRAs, 401ks, it's now age 72. There is some legislation out there that is trying to shift that to 73 and above. We don't know if it will pass. It actually has bipartisan support, but it's just about budget deficits right now.
Yeah.
The required minimum distribution you're basically going to be taking out is 4% each year. So again, we use the example of a $2 million portfolio, $2 million IRA. You'd have to pull out 80,000, and it'll go up a little bit each year percentage-wise. It's always dependent upon your balance on January 1st of the prior year on how much you have to pull out by the end of the year. Roth conversions, not everybody knows about this, but you can actually have money in a traditional IRA or a traditional 401k and convert it to a Roth IRA or a Roth 401k. It is a taxable event. So if you convert 50,000 of a traditional IRA to a Roth IRA, that's 50,000 you would add to your taxable income for the year. But the benefit of doing it is once the money's in the Roth, the money will grow tax-free forever. So it's an interesting strategy to consider, especially in a bear market or a correction where you can actually convert some of the money while the account values are depressed.
So we had a question here on the RMDs real quick. Does the RMD apply to all investment accounts? 4% from each at age 72. So the RMDs apply to any traditional retirement accounts, okay? So a traditional IRA or traditional 401k, with the exception if you're still employed by the company where the 401k money is, you can defer the RMD from that account, but it applies to any, we'll say, pre-tax, right, or traditional retirement accounts. It does not apply to Roth IRAs. It does not apply to
the Roth 401k. I don't know if they ever corrected that, but it actually still an RMD is required, but nobody ever leaves it in
right,
because of that.
Right.
You would switch it to a Roth IRA.
And then just to clarify, I think there's a question here. So the first year, so at age 72, the RMD amount is going to be right around 4% of your account balance. Okay. And then, as Alp said, that percentage actually goes up every year as you get older. It's never set to be 100%, right? The table is never meant to have you withdraw the full amount, but it will go up every year. And it's basically two components. It's that percentage, and it's the year-end value of all of your pre-tax retirement accounts. All right.
And the first year, you actually have the option to delay the first year till April 1st of the following year. If you do delay it, you have to take 2 distributions in the next year. So
Quick,
that
quick.
can
Oh,
make
sorry.
sense for some
Mhm.
people.
We did have
To
an
Roth or
e-money.
not to Roth,
Oh, sorry.
best way of looking at it. Go ahead.
Yeah, before
Go
you
ahead,
dive
Jason.
into the Roth or not to Roth, we did have a question on the e-money tool. Yeah, great question. I'm glad you pointed this out. We can absolutely model different spending rates or different spending levels depending on different age groups. We put in here just sort of for simplicity purposes, but absolutely we can say, hey, I love the line of the retirement, the 3 stages of retirement, your go-go years, your slow-go years, and your no-go years. We can absolutely say, hey, those go-go years where you want to spend a lot, travel a lot, do a lot, hey, okay, maybe it's higher than the 120, and then it comes down for a period, and then it reduces even more. But to Alp's point, he commented that for the baseline assumption, we assume that you just keep spending at that same level all the way throughout retirement. But that was just, again, that was just sort of for modeling purposes. We can absolutely customize it.
So the question of whether to Roth or not to Roth, you look at your current and future tax brackets. Best way to explain it, we didn't have Roths in my younger years. It's been more of a recent phenomenon. But if somebody's starting out in the workforce right now, we think regardless of their income bracket, if they're just starting out, it's really advantageous to put money into a Roth IRA or a Roth 401k, because then they will have that money grow tax free for the rest of their life. So if it's a 25-year-old adding money into a Roth 401k, think about that. That money will grow tax-free for the rest of your life. Huge benefit. There's, if you put money in a Roth, you can think about, what, I'm paying some tax today. I don't know what tax rates will be like in the future. So a little bit of tax diversification. You're always looking at your age and your retirement time horizon. If you put money in a Roth later on in life, while it's still beneficial, you're not getting the same bang for the buck as if somebody was putting it away at age 40 and they have 30, 35 years before the money will be needed. Retirement readiness, this happens quite frequently where we're working with somebody that they have more than enough money for retirement. And in those examples, Roth conversions can make sense, or just Roth contributions for the rest of their career, because they're setting up the next generation. Their heirs basically will benefit from them having money in a Roth as opposed to a traditional account.
Absolutely. Big fan of Roth. So as we wrap it up here, just the last couple slides, all right, we've touched on a lot of these different things, both the financial piece of things, right? Can you afford what you want to do, right? The two need to be, intertwined, right? Where am I? Who am I with? What am I doing? As Alp talked about, right? I think those 3 questions are really key. And then how much does that lifestyle cost, right? It's usually pretty similar to your pre-retirement, lifestyle costs, but there are definitely a variety of things that can change, maybe new, that we talked about. Take action now, right? It's never too late, right? It may feel like it in some instances, but it really is never too late, right? Evaluate your current situation. Live within, no, let me scratch that, below your means now, right? It's probably the most important thing we can all do at any point of our lives. Increase and prioritize your savings, right? If you're not max funding the plan through work, get yourself on a plan, right? Increase the savings of 1 or 2% each year to really get to that goal where you're putting in the max amount every single year. Reduce debt, downsize a home in retirement. That's definitely, it can be a really powerful tool. For an ode to our 401k folks, but definitely if you can avoid it, take no loans from retirement plans, right? Want to have that emergency fund built up, right, to prioritize, to not be in a situation where you need to feel like you need to take a loan from a retirement account. And then kind of to the point of the personal CFO hat and living below your means, absolutely do a review at least once a year. They're looking at all your expenses and to say, hey, do I still derive value from the money where I'm spending my money? And if not, cut it, right? And that's going to really help for retirement as well. So we have a lot of resources on our newly launched website. So please check it out. We're adding resources to it every day, thanks to Natalie. So there's blog posts, there's different handouts. We've got workshop recordings. Like I said, Social Security is just one great example. We've got a whole bunch of different recordings on different topics that we touched on today. So please check that out at afsfinancialgroup.com. Here's our team. So I know we ran just a couple minutes over, so thanks for sticking with us, everybody. And please don't hesitate to reach out with any questions or comments, feedback for today's presentation, how we can make it better, or if you'd like to schedule a time to connect. Any other parting words of wisdom, Alp?
I'll just say enjoy the nice weather. As I mentioned earlier, I'm a
Mhm.
fan of the warm weather.
Me too. Absolutely. Well, stay safe, everyone. Take care. Thanks for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Bye bye.
Goodbye.